Well, a good core, a gedal chess, Caramilla Marty, as dan 14 fortje, daar is je vroomheen, is Rev Mavan Kele, Saifi, visit Sanatart. May I first of all thank you for the very warm reception that you've given to Sabina and myself and those travelling with. I was very delighted to accept the invitation from Sheila Connell and her team at the Cork Alliance, and I want to congratulate them for organising this conference with its very powerful title, Narrowing the Disconnect, the Ethics of Supporting Desistance from Crime. I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity of meeting some of those who are working practically in the field of restoring people's lives, and also to have met those who have been working so hard at the task of transformation in their own lives, whose witness, after all, is perhaps the most important witness of all. But as President of Ireland, I want to thank the Cork Alliance that over the past 13 years has been providing an invaluable service in supporting people leaving prison to enable them to make a fresh start in life. It has demonstrated a willingness as well to do this, embracing new ideas and to encourage social justice in the context of our criminal justice system. I think it's best if I explained only for a moment my own connection with this general area. I was 25 when I went to the United States as a postgraduate student. It was a bit of a shock, really, because sociology hardly existed in Ireland at the time. So I think it was taught within philosophy. It included the great, if you like, pastorals, social concern, and so on. But suddenly I was in this atmosphere where one had to look at empirical work. It was heavily statistical, taking courses at 8 o'clock in the morning from Professor Peter Burke was a challenge. I had never claimed that mathematics was my strongest point, but I had quickly to make up gaps. But one way or another, the courses that I took, that I spent most time in, both when I was a postgraduate student in the States and also when I went back 10 years later to teach at Southern Illinois University, was the sociology of deviant behaviour, crime and punishment. And I would later spend a great deal of time in that, and it is part of the reason why I served on the MacBride Commission and in the early attempts to set up an Irish Criminological Association. I was involved in that as well. And let me be very straightforward and say the atmosphere here this morning is so different from what it was in those early days because setting up an Institute of Criminology wasn't possible in Ireland when I began as a young lecturer. I was appointed in UCG in 1969. And almost from that time on an all-island basis, we kept trying to get those people who were interested in this subject to be able to deal with practitioners and policymakers in the relevant government departments, those involved indirectly in the prison service, those involved in the judicial process, and so forth. When I began teaching the courses first in University College Galway, I attracted students not only from sociology, but from, after all, I had been back from Indiana University, where the Kinsey Institute was and so forth. So I had a huge voyeuristic appeal to people who came, I think, into my lectures to see what he was going to say about it. I remember in those early days pointing out, which was very useful to me to be able to say, that you had to work yourself back from the criminal statistics to the initial actions that initially brought people into contact with the prevention service or brought a person into relation to the prison service. I think later on, only when I was President of Ireland again, I went down in the course of my conversation and my first, I have two big initiatives that I ran, one being Young in Ireland and the other the ethics initiative that I ran. When I went, I received a submission from 3 young people in the Midlands prison, I remember. They wrote to me a very moving letter saying that they wanted to offer some opinions. And I had the opportunity in visiting the prison of sitting down with 3 of them and talking to them. And I thought of something that was very important to me that nothing would, I think, in any of the sociology books would have made clear to me, is how one terrible mistake had in fact changed the life of one of the young people. And we discussed this. And therefore, what I say today now, in many cases, is my main purpose is to celebrate and to celebrate the good things that have taken place. Nearly everything I have said has changed for the better, I think. We are now in a position where we're able to discuss crime, punishment, criminology, the justice system. We are also, I think, able to discuss prison reform without it being reduced to ridiculous notions that prison is too soft or prison is too hard. We're able to look at it. I have visited many prisons since I became president. I've seen caring services, Samaritans. I have presented cash awards in prisons and so on. That's all positive. Also, I think there is a considerable distance to go, I think, to see where, if you like, the academic work can see itself lodged in relation to policy options, and I still hold that view. And I think, and what I have to say today is just drawing on that kind of experience is the best contribution I can make. I think what one is involved in at anything is an issue of transformation. I also spent some time looking at the history of the prison system. And it's an extraordinary history because the history of the prison system outside of Ireland has incredible features. The Quakers, who were great social reformers, changed their mind twice in relation to the history of their approach to the prison system. For example, moving away from solitary confinement to the idea of work and so on. That's an ideology. And then in case in one of my long poems in one of my collections, I wrote a poem about the opening of Pentonville. The opening of Pentonville and the concept of the panopticon was in fact attended mostly by industrialists. And the Prince of Wales opened it, and the factory owners fired their silk hats in the air because there was a close connection between the possibility of being able to observe every action from a single point and the factory system. So the two histories, when I later looked at this in European context, the European system, the factory system and the prison system have almost identical sets of assumptions that you could run side by side. And then again, even in relation to the world of work and the study of women workers and discretion, it arises that prison is principally about discretion. Discretion over time, discretion over space, and discretion over the human body. Again, looking back at the long history of the prison system in Europe, why is it that the slumping out procedures are the last things to change? It is because, in fact, of what it represents in terms as a control feature and so on. So that's my background. I am not new to the whole area of deviant behaviour, crime and punishment. But today, when I'm paying tribute to the Cork Alliance, and along with the Cork Alliance, the Prisoner Probation Service, the Gardaí, all those who work in communities to enable people to rebond themselves and reknit themselves into the community. I'm also very, very well aware of something that's important, I think, in your own conference, your concentration on the victims of crimes. To suddenly find somebody appear behind you, to be the victim of an assault, to be the victim of a violent or threatening breach of privacy, to be living in an atmosphere of insecurity, is deeply, deeply damaging. It is not an incident, because those of you who are better qualified over in the psychoanalytic side, the lodgements that it makes in the human psyche are deep. So therefore we have to approach all of this in a way that can, I think, there is a very, very great Cork man who you should be very proud of, Professor Michael Carney, who wrote, one of the founders of palliative care, who wrote a great book on the wounded healer. And in a way, what you have to try and approach in all of this is a way in which we can, in fact, make a society that has been marked by violence and crime, or by these great communications of fear, how you can make it whole again. I think that it is something that doesn't involve only the self. When I finished being an academic, in many ways, I was looking back once at my old notes. And if you were from the political background I had come to in many ways, it had an interest in removing the great inequalities of crime. But you would have then media comments to saying, well, so-and-so was poor but they didn't commit crime in somewhere. But you could summarize that part of the literature by simply saying, I think, that gross inequalities can easily be shown to be related to higher levels of sickness, higher levels of crime, higher levels of problems of different kinds. It affects the rate, as it were. But then the incidence, this is an old Durkheimian thing that Durkheim had in relation to his study on suicide, which was that the unemployment rate affected the suicide rate, but that in any case you had to look at what was the last straw effect in each individual case. I've talked to people who've had the prison experience, and what strikes me in relation to the background factors, very, very much, and seeking to understand it, is the disadvantage that are already there. I listen very carefully to what people like Peter McVerry and others say. I've watched their interviews, and they describe about how youngsters are coming into the drug system in Dublin City and becoming involved in criminality. When you talk to those young people, the fact is, if you are being bombarded by television, if you are being told that your runners are of an inferior quality than anyone else's, that your clothes are lesser, that your housing is something that you can't bring your friends home, and suddenly you get a bundle of money that enables you to be the flashiest person in your peer group and so forth. There are factors in the environment. There are also, as well as that, if your parents, for example, are illiterate, through no fault of anybody, it is not a matter of blame or fault, there are difficulties in relation to literacy. And then there's a notion about as well of whom we regard as the most successful person. How are you to put all of this together? And then running through the institutions in Ireland, perhaps understandably after the foundations of the state, there is a strong streak of unaddressed authoritarianism. It's very interesting sometimes if you spend a whole day not saying anything, but listening to all of the people you meet. And the amount of people who are certain about things is marvellous. It is like a ping-pong table of certainties. And therefore, when you report on the Cork Alliance and all of that has been achieved, not everyone has changed. For example, I'll give you a big long list of the institutions that are taking place in your conference. And they all have their own culture. They all have their own assumptions. And many of them have embedded certainties about what kind of people end up in prison and what kind of people come out of prison and what these people's capacities are. So the task of transformation is a task that is one that involves more than those in prison. I think some of the most defined things I have seen in recent prisons, I visited prisons in an unwanted capacity in terms of many years ago when I was on the McBride Commission. I visited prisons more recently, and I'm very pleased at all the changes that are taking place. I think it's important, even from the moment of the first arrival, and I think that is important. I won't ramble from my exact points except to say this. From the very moment when a person commits a range of something that breaks a norm in a society, that is unexpected, unwanted, or inappropriate behaviour, to the time at which it is investigated and constituted as a crime, to the appearance of that person in a front of a court, and after that their introduction to prison, their going back into the community, and their return to prison. This process of identity formation that is going on in the person is an extraordinarily important one. You would see it, I remember, in a district court I brought my students to see one sometimes, where somebody who had been back in several times would stand up. "Oh, sure, I'm a lost cause, Your Honour." And the idea is that having assessed which judge was on the bench and so forth, whether it was one that you would have kind of just simply said that you were hopeless, and then you might find a soft one and you said, "I'm giving up the drink for life now and it'll never happen," and so on and so on. So whether one is doing these issues are very, very important. So I think in doing it, what one has to realise is that I admire those who work in this difficult area. Those who work in prisons, those who work in the welfare services, those who work in courts, and so forth. But very often, people are encountering problems that have been neglected at a deeper level. That it just doesn't need debate, but that the greater equality that you're allowing for children in terms of education and housing and health and literacy and access to books and care and so forth, it has a huge effect. This doesn't mean for effect. All I want to say is that people who get over those particular difficulties are entitled to a special consideration if in fact they have been damaged in a way that removes them from society, that they have to return to society again and they're trying to make their way back. And as well as that, it is very important that we have a community response in relation to the effects, for example, on an older person who has in fact been assaulted. The effect of people who have had something very personal. They may have very few things stolen from them. The idea of the shock that it is to have, as I said, your privacy violated. I think that it's great that you're having this conference. But the one point I was making about identity, as the person has made their way through that journey, from deviance through identification, through criminalisation, to possible stigmatisation, to recidivism and so forth, along the way there are possibilities of releasing oneself from this journey. That is the task of transformation, and that is what all the institutions are doing. And it is a shocking thing to think that in the year 2016, that a young black teenager has about 1/10 of the chance of entering a college than he has of ending up in prison. And then you have to it would be immoral of me, as a person who was an academic in this area, to say that we should look at the consequences of the privatization of the prison system in the United States and what it has delivered. What appalling consequences it has delivered. So therefore it isn't only about the wealth of a society, or the wealth. It is how in fact you distribute in such a way as that you live and have a civilized society. I think that all of us, by your own work in the Cork Alliance, you're issuing an invitation to the public, and you are saying all of us should be involved in this task. I know Barbara Castle, a long time ago, when she was writing her report for the Labour Party in Britain, when I was when I was a young student working in the summer, she called hers "Children in Trouble." How are we to be able to take children out of the risks that they are in relation to get off this treadmill thereon. I think, therefore, as well, if you allow, for example, people who are illiterate to go into the prison system and be unable to handle the literacy classes, I pay so tribute. I've seen those, and some of you are here, those who work in the different crafts, those who work on the different skills, are doing wonderful work. One of the finest paintings in Áras an Uachtaráin is a painting from one of those classes in one of the prisons in Ireland. I think that these social, economic and personal challenges that are left to us, we just have to realise them. And there's some obvious things that seem to be escaping the attention. I know the heads of governments in Europe are meeting this week in Bratislava, and they'll be discussing the future of Europe, and they'll spend most of their time discussing security. But isn't it so obvious that a cohesive Europe, that wouldn't have a youth unemployment rate of the present rate, that wouldn't have a youth unemployment that wasn't reducing and that was becoming ghettoised and that was becoming available to fundamentalisms and available to crime? Cohesion, making Europe cohesive. When we all voted for the Lisbon Treaty, whatever it was Europe to be competitive and cohesive. Social cohesion is the best contribution. It isn't the only one, but it is the only it is the surest positive step towards reducing insecurity and so on. I think in the challenge of solidarity and so on, the other thing which I think is very, very important, which raises a very interesting issue. I remember when I was teaching in the 1970s in Illinois, if you had a serious crime and a person had been apprehended, sometimes depending, in fact, on the state of revenues of the state, you'd push the apprehended person over the border so that the costs wouldn't fall and that the mayor had a better chance of being elected and that the governor's election campaign wouldn't be affected and so forth. This is a huge issue. The big phenomenon in more recent years has been, and I think is right, has been the public opprobrium for white-collar crime. I think that it really is the old case, is that when in fact actually when we've looked at the people who are stealing the goose, we might look at the people who are stealing the field from under the goose. And I think that this is... I want to say about the task of reintegration itself. Again, I'm here to pay tribute again to those new measures that have been put in place, enabling people for the release system being better managed. That has changed from a time when a person might have been released early in the morning when the different agencies to which you needed to relate were closed. The integration, if you like, of these simple gestures, they're not gestures, these simple rights are very important. Because in all of the time we're talking about rights, I don't for a second undervalue the importance of a society being free from criminal acts. But I'm simply saying at the same time, there is a universe of acts that have happened, that have to be transacted by us all. And therefore, when a person is starting again, we all have to at different times of our lives. Many people, nearly every single person in this room, I would suggest, has done something that they're glad they weren't caught. And that is the reality of it. The difference about it is that making your way to a business of realising that we are not moving around as perfect entities in some universe, occasionally disrupted by finding people less perfect than ourselves. It's a lumpy business, this business, of in fact actually getting real about working with a person who happens to say, yes, I had an experience, so forth, and a few times, but this time I'm going to make it worse from work for myself. Such people require solidarity. But most important, which is very, very important as well, friendship. There's nothing as important. I refer to us all in our lives as migrants in time. We might as well, in fact, actually make and help and people develop real, sustained, meaningful friendship. And yes, there are good services that can be provided. The problem that you'd have in many ways, why did I know so much about, for example, people who had gone to prison from Galway? Well, part of the reason is that there weren't many votes in it. So you found yourself in a way that people would come from other people's clinics. So that's the kind of thing that Michael D does. And so forth. And you also noticed as well, at that particular stage, not if all prisoners and their families were on the register either. So therefore they would say, well, you'd be wasting your time. Well, I think it's one of the most important issues. And I think that I really do pay credit. Remember, if I said that the system was tough, it wasn't amenable to this having criminology institutes, have meaning to having policy discussions, amenable to making changes. Well, that reflects all the greater credit on those who did make those changes. And I hope they get support and they really deserve it. Last year I had the opportunity of addressing the 30th anniversary conference of Irish Commission for Prisoners Overseas. And there what I felt was very, very important, the importance of maintaining contact with families and communities. And I think that that is very important. I think one way of dealing with all of this, I know you're very fortunate in having the service of psychotherapists who assist you. But I think is to see the total community as a community of vulnerabilities. There's a couple of business about there's a huge way, depending on whether citizens in a country, they look at it as a set of properties or as a set of vulnerabilities. If you look at it as people are vulnerable in different ways, even those who have committed an act of violence in a way, it can best come back from it by coming to realise the consequences of their action. Hence all that work in relation to new forms of justice are very, very important. I really think that the structured support releases, the community return programme, those community support schemes have been very, very good. The most important contributions you will have had are the contributions you've heard from those people I've had the privilege of meeting who are speaking about their experience. I so wish them all well in their task of transformation. As President of Ireland, I thank them for sharing their experience because it will be such an important encouragement to others. I also want to say as well that you have the title of what you're saying, the ethics of supporting desistance from crime. I think that one of the things that we need to do in a way when we're thinking about what we mean by these ethics, to construct an ethic of friendship, an ethic that comes out of vulnerability. It's a very interesting thing in Michael Carney's work that I referred to. It was really one of the founders of palliative care. He said that even within the religious systems, Jesus decided to abandon his immortality so that he could achieve the experience of being human. People have to experience take on the experience of being vulnerable, of all of the people in the community, if you are in fact to make a significant contribution. This is the difference. There was in medicine, they used to have the notion about the Hippocratic Oath, which is one about reducing pain and not doing anything wrong. But the Asclepius, on the other hand, was the one about how you healed people. The wounded person could heal the other wounded person through touch and through friendship and so forth. And this is there's nothing soft about this. It just makes an enormous amount of sense. What you have very often when you don't have good policy discussions, when you don't have openness to change, when you don't have an ability to take all the different experiences into account, you get a great deal of noise. And you get even then there's a kind of a noise of certainty as well. And then you hear people saying things, but sure everyone knows that, and everyone does that, and so on, and so on. The amount of people in this country at times when things like that, there's nothing as a more beautiful support of certainty than ignorance. And that is therefore whether people are speaking about vulnerable communities on the move, people, for example, who are dependent in one way or another. And that's why I like the phrase, the ethics of supporting desistance from crime. And I make a plea that it be supported by a deeper understanding of society. I want to finish then by saying this. There is no contradiction whatever in keeping society safe and treating offenders temporarily properly. And when you say the word offender in many cases, I think of the person I had in front of a district justice. I'm a lost cause, Your Honour. At that particular stage, how has the person defined themselves? Well, we've had good times and bad times. And there are times all of people in this room and elsewhere will have been better versions of themselves than they might have been. And exactly the same way, we have to explain to people in many cases that the page is there to still take some new writing, new versions of themselves. I welcome the fact that there has been the Department of Justice and Equality and its agents and community partners are working together as well to see how social enterprise and to see how the world of work can be transformed to enable people to move out into this new experience of their life. I am well aware of the group that has reported to Francis Fitzgerald, Taoiseach and Minister for Justice, and the report that was published in September 2014. I do want to say those 43 recommendations are very worthy of support, but I want to say too as well that in my time I'm so pleased, I'm so anxious to recognise the work of people like Michael Donlan of the Irish Prison Service and Vivian Guerin of the Probation Service and all those wonderful people who work in the training sections and who work in the school service and so forth. And also the sensitive people in the prison service, the probation service and in Garda Síochána who have sought to understand rather than to rush to the certainty of condemnation. I also think as well that the Change Works programme, the Joint Agency Response to Crime, and so on, I would only say in relation to when people use the phrase joint agency, you have to be very careful. The agencies mustn't come to trade their certainties or their assumptions. They must come having made an initial statement to say, we have in fact begun examining ourselves and we are open to conversation on this and this and this. I think that is by way of my positive contribution, by way of humble advice. I also think as well that in relation to communities and so on, it is important for communities to cooperate together in assisting those who have in any way been damaged. I think this, one thing that is becoming clear, and that is this. I said that part of the reasons, the difficulties about establishing good penal policy is that there weren't votes in it. One thing is certain, and you have demonstrated it, it is that when communities want to understand, and when communities take all of these initiatives and make them part of their community practice, that they have their best chance. And that's why it is such a privilege to come here today and to be able to recognise that. May I express my appreciation to all those who work with offenders. May I also salute those offenders who are helping others. I wish them so well in their task of transformation, be it prison officers, probation officers, Gardaí, community project workers, counsellors, and all of those of you who have special skills. This work is critical, and the benefit of your work cannot be overestimated, and it will not just last for a day. It is something that will endure. And it is a crucial contribution, a building block towards building the ethical society in which we all want to share in all our imperfections and in the versions of our wounded selves. Gur míle maith, thank you.